Generational report says that if we do nothing, then the states won't be able to fund anything else other than health by the time we all retire. The federal government
you haven't even won the states. You haven't even won the states. Got them on board yet. I mean, if that's the case, if that's such a compelling argument, why have you got WA, Victoria, and others expressing concern?
Oh, the point that the Prime Minister will make to the state premiers, I'm sure, over the course of the next few weeks, is that you can't put your head in the sand. If we keep doing things the way we are, then the states won't be able to fund anything else other than health by the time we retire, by 2045. This new funding system is going to ensure that there's enough funding to run a proper hospital system, and it'll mean that the states will be $15 billion better off over the next decade.
OK, well, let's hear what the head of the AMA, Andrew Pesce, said straight after the Prime Minister's speech yesterday.
The AMA is receptive to the various suggestions that could empower local workforce, the nurses and the doctors, to provide the decision-making capacity and have input into decisions at the hospitals. So these are all things which the AMA has been emphasising as very important, and they look to have been delivered.
Senator Birmingham, so the government doesn't have the support of the states at this point, but they do of the medical fraternity. That's a pretty good start.
Well, you see on the front page of the Australian today, Kieran, that the medical fraternity is split and divided on opinions around this, and that's hardly surprising given the lack of detail that's really been spelt out by Kevin Rudd on what this will deliver for patients and how quickly it will deliver for patients. But I just want to tackle Jason's points on criticisms of the Howard government and what happened there. Let's remember that it was the Howard government that put in place a safety net for Medicare, invested significantly in addressing some of those issues in the health system. It was the Howard government that put in place the GST framework to give the states and territories a growth tax that, of course, the Rudd government is now trying to start to rip back off them to pay for this promise. Now, Kevin Rudd wants to talk about ending the blame game in this. If somebody could explain to me how they're going to, by changing the funding formula from a 75 or 70-30 split to a 40-60 split between state and federal governments, end that argy-bargy between the states and the federal government, is a little beyond me, because frankly the states will still be putting in a large 40% share of this. There will still be that annual argy-bargy. Kevin Rudd is not coming up with a clearer formula. He's coming up with a formula that will still involve the federal government, still involve state governments, add a level of regional bureaucracy to the mix, and so you end up with a bigger case for blame game, a bigger case of argy-bargy between state, federal and regional authorities, before the poor old hospital and health service at the end gets a look in anywhere.
Well, I'm happy to answer that if you want.
OK, well, I'll let you respond, Jason, but also I want to ask you the question about the referenda. The history of referenda in this country shows that a third, I think less than a third of all referenda that have gone to the people have failed. So if you don't get the states on board, this is likely to be another big-ticket reform that goes by the wayside.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll do those in two parts. On the blame game, the reason that the states blamed the Howard government was because when the Howard government came to power, the federal government was funding 45% of the hospital system, and when they left office it was below 40%. That's where the blame game started.
And the states have been given a GST to pay for health services in the meantime. A big new growth tax that the GST was given to the states.
$1 billion, Simon. Hang on, mate. You had a good crack. You had a good crack. Let me respond to the comments you've made. It's all fair. All fair.
How many extra dollars did the states get?
Hang on a sec, mate. No one can hear us if you keep interrupting. Tony Abbott ripped $1 billion out. It went from 45% of funding for hospitals down to 40%. This now sets it in stone at 60%. And instead of funding based on a block grant, a big cheque that goes to the states, we're funding based on services and procedures. That's the advice of Dr. Christine Bennett, the experts there. And in terms of these new local hospital networks, we're getting rid of those area health services. Like in New South Wales, the one that's in my area in Western Sydney goes from Balmain all the way to Bowral. It's got 1.3 million people in it and a dozen hospitals. Changing that to local hospital networks. Now, that's getting rid of one layer of bureaucracy and having something in place which is going to have feedback from doctors and from nurses and local experts. That's the way we should go.
All right, let's just pause there. A couple of other quick issues before we go. Tony Abbott, Simon Birmingham, the action man, went missing on quad bikes in the middle of nowhere. A bit of a scare for him. He's certainly proving to be, as I said, a bit of an adventure man, isn't he?
Well, Tony likes to get out there and listen to people everywhere. I had him here in South Australia a few weeks ago. He was on and off boats and in and out of paddocks around the Murray listening to water problems. He's out there in Central Australia listening to Indigenous people. But I think Tony hit the nail on the head yesterday when he said that if you're with the traditional owners in the Australian outback, you're never lost. Might take you a little bit longer to get back than you planned, but you're certainly never lost. And certainly I think he's found it to be a very valuable experience to see and hear firsthand many of the issues that people in Central Australia are confronting.
Jason, Clare, he's certainly setting a cracking pace. Some people suggesting he resembles a Vladimir Putin almost, an Australian Vladimir Putin with the fit leader. What do you think? He's going to be hard to keep up with.
He's a bit like Vladimir Putin. I'm surprised that we haven't seen him half naked on a horse yet, or jumping into a freezing lake, or shooting a tiger. If Tony Abbott was running for Prime Minister of Russia, then he'd be a shoo-in, I suspect. He's a risk taker. He takes risks. He gets out there, and occasionally he's going to get lost. But my mail this morning, Kieran, is that when he was at Fossil Creek, he found half the Liberal Party there, including that rare endangered species, the Wilson Tuckysaurus, and the Barnaby the dinosaur. But in all seriousness, look,
you were practising in front of the mirror this morning, Jason.
Mate,
you got all the witty one-liners.
I agree with Simon. Right. Good that he's out there. It's very important work, and good that he's back safe.
Fellas, we're almost out of time, 1 minute to go, but I just want to get your quick response to the suggestion, a group of Coalition and Labor MPs pushing for a more generous lump sum when they leave the Parliament. Jason, 20 seconds or less, what do you think?
Now, the importance here is that it should all be done independently, and that politicians should be accountable for everything that they're spending, and it should all be transparent.
Simon?
Ditto is probably the easiest answer there, Kieran. We all stick by the rules as they are, set by independent bodies. That's the way it should be. That's the way it needs to stay.
Well, that's good. We reached an agreement at the end. Good on you, Senator Simon Birmingham and Jason Clare. Appreciate your time this morning. Thanks.
Thanks, Kieran.
A pleasure.
That's all for the program. David Spears will be along as always, 4:15 p.m. for PM Agenda. I'm Kieran Gilbert. Thanks for your company.